The GOAT debate in any sport is always a difficult but interesting one. However, in combat sports specifically, such as MMA and boxing, the debate is even harder, as so many people have so many different opinions and statistics to back up their answers. In MMA specifically, the same names are commonly brought up in the GOAT debate. These names are the likes of Jon Jones, Anderson Silva, and Demetrious Johnson. And although these names are rightfully brought up, there is rarely a lot of variety in the debate. Ranker recently put together a fan vote where over 14,000 people voted for who they believe is the MMA GOAT. 1. Georges St Pierre, professional MMA record, 26-2. Taking the top spot as the greatest MMA fighter of all time in Ranker's fan vote is Canadian legend Georges St Pierre. As mentioned previously, in the eyes of the majority of MMA fans over the years, the GOAT is Jon Jones. However, St Pierre has always and will always feature in the conversation when discussing the greats of MMA. Often, when people get into the GOAT debate, the most common names which pop up are Jones, St Pierre, and Anderson Silva, and the thing which makes GSP stick out is the fact that he doesn't have any history of failed drug tests and was a clean competitor throughout his career. Rush dominated the UFC's welterweight division for almost a decade and retired at the very top of the division after an incredible 9 title defenses. 4 years after he hung up his gloves, St Pierre came out of retirement and booked himself to face Michael Bisping in his middleweight debut for the title. Despite spending almost 4 years outside the octagon, the Canadian came back looking just as good as he did when he initially retired and defeated the Brit via round 3 submission to become a 2-division champion, which just added to his already unbelievable legacy. 2. Jon Jones, professional MMA record, 28-1. To the large majority of MMA fans, Jon Jones is the greatest fighter in MMA history. However, in Ranker's fan vote, Bones takes the number 2 spot. As you have probably heard many times over the years, given UFC President Dana White's non-stop praise, Jones holds pretty much every significant UFC-related record there is to hold, and almost 20 years into his professional career, he is still yet to take a legitimate loss, despite fighting the best of the best since 2008. Bones holds the record for most wins ever in UFC title fights with 16, and may even add to that as he is still active. If Jones' work in the light heavyweight division wasn't already more than enough to secure himself GOAT status in the eyes of most MMA fans, in 2023, he made his long-awaited move up to heavyweight, and yet again, he has known nothing but success. Bones defeated Cyril Gane in his heavyweight debut and dominated the greatest heavyweight ever, Stipe Miocic, in his most recent fight, breaking yet another record in the process, this time for the most overall title defenses in UFC history with 12. 3. Anderson Silva, professional MMA record, 34-11. Since the UFC formed in 1993, the promotion has had several legendary fighters who are constantly thought of when you think of the UFC, and Anderson Silva is one of them. The Spider was pivotal for the promotion during their entrance into the mainstream, as he was insanely entertaining and had a style which would make fans' jaws drop, given his Matrix-like movement and devastating but creative striking skills. The Brazilian is mainly known for his flashy style and iconic knockouts. However, there have been several fighters over the years in MMA who have had those exact things, but what makes Silva stand out is his accolades and achievements. As previously mentioned, the Spider has the joint record for consecutive UFC title defenses with 11. He also holds the record for the longest UFC title reign ever at 2,457 days. And he also holds the record for most finishes in UFC title fights, which shows he wasn't just producing his iconic knockouts against any ordinary fighters but elite-level competition. 4. Demetrious Johnson, professional MMA record, 25-4. Demetrious Johnson is one of the most respected martial artists ever and has been recognized as one of the greatest fighters of all time for almost a decade. Although Johnson is well thought of and highly rated by MMA fans and analysts, it is likely that he would be rated a lot higher if he weren't a flyweight, as historically, there hasn't been much interest in the UFC's 125 pounds division. Despite the lack of interest in the flyweight division, Mighty Mouse has always been appreciated for his incredible skill and achievements, particularly his joint record with Anderson Silva of having the most consecutive title defenses in UFC history, with a whopping 11. Away from his accolades, Johnson, during his UFC run, also managed to produce some iconic moments, such as his insane armbar victory over Ray Borg, as well as his last-second submission win against Kyoji Horiguchi, which is tied for the latest stoppage in UFC history. 5. Fedor Amelionenko. Professional MMA record, 40-7. There are many phenomenal MMA fighters who have never fought in the UFC, and Fedor Amelionenko, to many, is the greatest of them all. The Last Emperor was linked with a move over to the UFC several times during his career, but for whatever reason, it never materialized, even though he would have been favored to beat pretty much any heavyweight champion the UFC has ever had. Amelionenko's reputation as one of the greatest heavyweights ever stems from his almost 10-year unbeaten streak, where he dominated everywhere he fought, but mainly in the Japanese promotion, Pride. The Last Emperor is one of the most terrifying but skilled heavyweights ever, and he could win fights in any department, whether he utilized his world-class sambo and judo, or opted to obliterate his opponents on the feet with his speed and power. 6. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Professional MMA record, 29-0. Arguably the most dominant force in the history of MMA, Khabib Nurmagomedov is an absolute must to mention when speaking about the all-time greats. The Eagle, still to this day, remains the only fighter to have fought at an elite level to get as high as 29 fights undefeated as a professional. On the face of it, Nurmagomedov retiring with an undefeated professional MMA record of 29-0 is incredibly impressive, but when you look deeper into it and realize that out of those 29 fights, he probably didn't lose a single round, it gets more and more impressive. The Russian was a specialist at breaking his opponents, both physically and mentally, and to many is the greatest fighter in one of the most stacked and talented divisions ever. 7. Daniel Cormier. Professional MMA record, 22-3. Out of all the simultaneous double champions the UFC has had over the years, Daniel Cormier becoming both UFC light heavyweight and heavyweight champion is arguably the most impressive reign of them all. DC operated as a heavyweight for the first 13 fights of his professional MMA career, but later moved down to light heavyweight and found immense success there. Later on in his career, when he had cemented himself as an all-time great, Cormier moved back up and brutally knocked out the greatest heavyweight of all time, Stipe Miocic, to win the UFC heavyweight title. For his incredible success across both MMA and freestyle wrestling, Cormier is credited as one of the greatest combat sports athletes ever. 8. Alexander Volkanovski. Professional MMA record, 27-4. After his victory over Diego Lopez at UFC 314 to become a two-time UFC featherweight champion, there can really be no disputing anymore that Alexander Volkanovski is the greatest featherweight to ever grace the sport of MMA. During his first run as featherweight champion, where he managed to defend the title successfully 5 times, the Australian defeated everyone in his path pretty comfortably and impressively defeated Max Holloway, who is thought of by many as the second greatest featherweight ever, on 3 separate occasions. The main thing which will make Volkanovski stick out in the minds of MMA fans for years to come is his versatility as a fighter. The Great has the ability to outclass anyone wherever the fight goes, but if needed, he will bite down on his mouthpiece and scrap it out. 9. Jose Aldo. Professional MMA record, 32-10 following his loss to Ayman Zahabi at UFC 315. Jose Aldo retired from MMA. Dubbed the King of Rio throughout his career, Aldo is an absolute icon for Brazilian MMA, and when you think about the incredible fighters the nation has had over the years, Aldo is arguably the only lighter weight fighter who comes to mind. Something which may shock fans who are new to the sport of MMA is that the very best of Aldo wasn't seen in the UFC, as he was in his prime when he was fighting in the WEC. In his prime, Aldo was one of the most entertaining but devastating strikers of all time, and he was hailed as the greatest 3-round fighter ever by Joe Rogan many times. 10. Islam Makhachev. Professional MMA record, 27-1. Islam Makhachev's time in the UFC's lightweight division has come to an end, and he will now pursue a world title in the welterweight division. Many MMA fans believe that Makhachev's run as lightweight champion has seen him surpass the legacy of Khabib Nurmagomedov, and while this is still up for debate, if he is able to secure that second UFC title in a higher division, there will be no argument against Makhachev surpassing his good friend, now coach. Makhachev's dominance in the UFC has stemmed from his immense well-roundedness, and he seems to be getting better with each fight. He may have started his UFC career as a pure grappler, but Makhachev is now elite in every aspect of MMA and to many, the current pound-for-pound best fighter alive.